This is Derrick Broze. This is Derrick Broze of the Conscious Resistance. I'm here in Standing Rock.
That man is wanted in 5 different countries: Chile, Argentina, Brazil.
We've been fighting a long time. We've all lost so very much. So many loved ones gone.
Don't you fucking tease that horse!
You are not alone. There are pockets of resistance all around the planet. We are at the brink. Above all, stay alive. You have no idea how important you are. If you're listening to this, you are the resistance.
Hey everyone, this is Derrick Broze of the Conscious Resistance Network, and today I'm back with another important guest, somebody I haven't spoke to before that I really hope you will check out, and I'm going to get to know today through this conversation. Please welcome Christian with IceAgeFarmer. How you doing, brother?
I'm well, Derrick. Thanks for having me.
So this is the first time we're ever speaking other than on Twitter and online. But I've been following your work for the last 6 months or so. Is probably about the time that I discovered you, along with COVID, everything, right? And you do just so many great reports as far as food, the food crisis, permaculture, sustainability, true sustainability, not Agenda 21 sustainability. You cover a lot of ground that is topics that I've tried to cover here and there, but you are pretty good at focusing on that area, and I really appreciate that. So I want to talk to you about everything you've been doing recently. Before we do get into that, if you don't mind, whatever background you'd like to share, maybe just let everybody know a bit about yourself, your channel, and when exactly you started going down this path.
Sure, yeah. I do think this is one of the most important conversations that we can have right now, and so I appreciate you having me on to have it. I have a background in artificial intelligence and machine learning and robotics, and was doing that as an undergraduate. Just thought that was really fun to do that in college, until I found out that some of the code and algorithms we had developed, which we then shared with NASA, then got passed on to the DoD and was used for some of these shotgun-wielding robots. And I was like, whoa, this is this is not what I want my karma to be around. So I got out of that business pretty quickly. And then I went to work for a hedge fund after school, and was sort of learning how the sausage was made there. There was a Harvard finance MBA guy there explaining, we cut up the mortgages and then we sell different slices to people, and it's rated AAA at that point, so we can make a ton of money. And I said, how is that, how is that legal? And he's like, well, it's not illegal. That's the beauty of it. We can get away with it. So I kind of kept bumping into these dead ends of like, this is not the world that we expected or that we want to interact with. And I think a lot of us have had those sorts of experiences on our paths, and they inform who we are and how we choose to approach now this really special point, this critical junction, 2020 in time and human development. So all of those have sort of shaped the vision of what's going on right now. And most recently, but I think tipped off also by the technocrats themselves. You've got Henry Kissinger saying, if you control food, you control people. And you've got Bertrand Russell saying it is a combination of diet, injections, and injunctions that we will use to render humanity into unthinking slaves that won't be able to challenge us at all. And so they've sort of tipped the hat at the fact that food is absolutely a critical weapon in this agenda that they're perpetrating, this transhumanist totalitarian takeover of society. And so, I started digging really deeply into this, how they're going to use food as a weapon, how, it's a lot of people are familiar with sort of the big picture, the GMO, the fact that they've been whittling away at our food supply and making it less nutritive and generally bad anyway. But I think so too is there a point, and they've sort of started going down this road now, where there will be engineered food shortages, a Holodomor 2.0, which is sort of the way that the communists have traditionally taken power over resistant populations. And so we've been keeping a close eye on the signs that we're entering into food scarcity right now, and engineered food scarcity, and that this will be used as the teeth, really, of the agenda that's been rolled out, particularly in 2020, this whole push for contact tracing and total information awareness, and all the concepts we've been talking about.
So at what point did you decide to start your YouTube channel?
It's been about 4 years now, and that started off chiefly by looking at the cycles of the sun and the grand solar minimum. And so, there's a lot of change, a lot of noise, obviously, in the whole climate change versus global warming controversy. And it wasn't until I started looking more deeply into the cycles of the sun and the ways that those have very real and very significant effects on our planet and our food production that I started to get a sense for this is a looming problem for us. This has happened 200, 400 years ago, going on back throughout history. You can see these periods of time where the sun dips down into a quiet period and our temperatures drop off, but more noticeably is that our growing seasons change and there are massive crop losses, and throughout history tens of millions of people have died when this happens. And we've been entering into such a period of, it's called a grand solar minimum, of reduced solar activity right now. And so I really wanted to get the word out about that and hope that by spreading awareness, more people would be growing their own food, and maybe we could even get the governments of the world to work on our behalf and start preparing. And then, of course, in these intervening years now, I've seen that the governments of the world are very well aware of it, that's part of what was being hidden by this global warming change, and that, in fact, they intend to take full advantage of this crisis, this food shortage, by seizing the day and taking total control, yeah.
Yeah, and so I would guess that most of my audience is probably skeptical of climate change. I myself have actually never really dove into it. Watched other videos, watched a little bit here about grand solar minimum, and of course I'm aware of the phases of the sun. But it's not a topic I've dove deeply into as far as videos goes. I've done my own private research, but as you're aware, it's a controversial topic in some circles to say that, hey, maybe I don't buy into the cult narrative of what's going on and what they say climate change is, because clearly there's changes going on, but the debate hinges on what is the driving force to that. Is it human actions? Is it cow farts? Or is it the sun or something else? So I'm excited to talk about that because it's definitely something I haven't got into. So if you don't mind, could you go a little deeper into what the grand solar minimum is? And I guess you kind of touched on this, but how it differentiates itself from that mainstream version of climate change?
Yeah, definitely. Great question. And you're right also to call out that there's just so much noise out there. If you actually go and try and do an earnest investigation, you're flooded on all sides by information and disinformation and misinformation and ClimateGate. And it's hard to tell at some point what's going on. And the two major voices are, of course, that global warming versus no, not global warming, right? And so this false dichotomy, you're kind of, you either maybe believe one side or the other, but you don't know where to go. And so that's why I say we need to look at the cycles of the sun and the fact that they drive most of the processes on this planet. And when you look back in history, and I've got a whole section on IceAgeFarmer.com/history, just because it's so important and I think impressive when you look back at what people wrote. Thomas Jefferson writes about how the corn crop was 20% of what it usually was for a period of years in there. And you can read in the journals of Lewis and Clark as they traversed North America. There were ridiculous hailstorms and like negative 100-degree temperatures as they were up there. Things that were just unseasonably cold and unusually unstable growing seasons. And then if you go back even further, these previous grand minimums are called the Dalton minimum and the Maunder minimum, and you can see the effects on food production and on human history. For instance, when you look back at Europe, there was a period in 1315 called the Great Famine, where it just didn't get warm over the summer, and so crops didn't grow, and there were cascading effects, right? There was no grain to feed the animals, and so then there were no animals to do the labor on the farms, and it just gets worse and worse, and people end up eating through their seed stocks, so they don't have seeds to plant next year. And so, yeah, tens of millions of people died in that Great Famine of 1315, and it took years to rebuild that food supply. And if you look back at these charts of sunspot activity, you can clearly see that these grand minimas align with these difficulties in the growing seasons and with periods where the jet stream weakens. And so there are pockets of warm air from the equator that sneak up, and vice versa, pockets of Arctic air that sneak down. And we now know, the media has been calling these polar vortices lately that come down and shock you when you're not expecting really cold temperatures, and of course kill crops. So we've been seeing these sorts of symptoms of the grand solar minimum, like the weakened jet stream and those meridional flows, the pockets of cold air sneaking down, increases in hail, reduced temperatures, but more more noticeably is the increased variability of temperatures, and the fact that sometimes you'll have a really late frost sometimes in the middle of your growing season, or as we did last year, a really early frost, which killed off the sugar beet crop and a lot of canola in Canada. This was like a September frost, which is uncharacteristically cold for that time of year. So that's sort of one way that I think that's the most informative way, is to look back in history, because that's, as we're doomed to repeat these cycles, that is the most informative thing that we can learn from. And yeah.
How does the mainstream treat this theory? I mean, do they even acknowledge sun cycles? I mean, or do they just kind of downplay that they have the effect that you're talking about here?
They absolutely downplay it. And I think the UN, there have been, laugh-worthy statements from officials at the UN that just say flat out, the sun has no effect on climate on this planet. They are slowly starting to revise that, just because it is so ridiculous a claim to make. But absolutely, most of the major models that are being used by the IPCC completely neglect the influence of the sun. There are climate scientists and other scientists out there who are looking at this, more critically, and who are aware of these things. One of them, Dr. Valentina Zarkova, actually just released a paper a couple weeks ago, sort of revalidating, using the most recent data, this breakdown of her model of solar activity. She's got a dynamo model of the way that there are interactive fields, magnetic fields within the sun, and that these are usually in phase. And so when you look at the sunspot cycle, there's this 11-year cycle. It's called the Schwab cycle of, we'll call it normal activity, sort of baseline, the heartbeat of the sun as it goes from a maximum into a minimum every 11 years. And that's normal, and that's good. And there are some minor effects, during the maximum or the minimum. There are some changes on the planet, but for the most part, that's what we can consider stable conditions, the good, strong growing seasons that we've been enjoying for the last 100 years or so during what's called the modern grand maximum. You can even on Wikipedia, like you're asking what about mainstream science? Yeah, Wikipedia does have a page on sunspot cycles. And it unambiguously mentions that as of 2008, we have departed from a grand maximum of activity. So already we know there's some questions to be answered here about how this is going to affect our planet. And so, yes, these others... Go ahead.
Just to clarify, so then, as the name would indicate, that a grand solar minimum then is a decrease of activity in the sun, from the sun.
Exactly. So during the periods of the grand minimum, what you usually see in that 11-year cycle is somewhat muted, or in a more severe case, it just goes to zero for a while, and the sun goes to sleep for a while, as it did during the Maunder minimum. And that's when you get the more extreme effects, the volcanism, the earthquakes, the extreme crop losses that have taken lives throughout history. Yeah.
And so I want to kind of touch back on what we were saying a moment ago about that dichotomy, right? It's either you believe in man-made climate change, or you, think that there's no effects at all, and so it's just don't pay any attention to it. As somebody who does care about the environment, who cares about the planet, who likes to, I've been involved in the urban gardening, farming, and taking a permaculture course right now, as I mentioned to you. These things are absolutely important to me. Getting more connected to the planet and working in balance with it, rather than using invasive, destructive agricultural practices that we see practiced today. But I noticed that there's this, in reaction to that false dichotomy of it's either global warming, man-made climate change, or there's nothing, that often I see activists that as soon as they hear the word sustainable, or even maybe just permaculture, or just talk of taking care of the planet, they make the assumption that, you're buying into Agenda 21, 2030 propaganda, as if there's no way to still care about the planet, care about the environment, and want to improve things and be closer to your food and maybe live like our ancestors have, without buying into all the UN propaganda. Have you run into that?
Absolutely, yeah. I would. The way I refer to this is that the information space itself has been weaponized. Yeah, so you're trapped in the fact that if you're either that way or you're this way, and there's no way to actually be good, right? As you actually want to do the right thing, that space has not been afforded to us in the mainstream definitions of terms, even like as you're saying. Yeah, so absolutely, I've run into that.
And I think that's like you said, weaponized. I think it's done by design, without effect. I do think that this is to discourage people from, I just had this the other day when I posted a picture of a book I have right here called Toolbox for Sustainable City Living, and it's all about just how to get off the city grid if you're living in a city environment. And somebody's like, sustainable. As soon as I hear that word, I think United Nations, and just sort of dismiss the whole thing. And I think that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk to you, because from what I see with your work, not only you're coming from the awareness of the grand solar minimum and your concerns about that, so then as a reaction to that, you're starting to think, well, how are we going to survive into the, going into the future, right? And so I've noticed that you have kind of guides on what foods can be grown different, as we move into the grand solar minimum and different parts of the world. Do you want to talk about that for a moment?
Sure. No, and I think you're dead on. The technocrats would love to. They have constructed these systems that are disgusting and are failing, right? Factory farming's the CAFO with concentrated animals and the toxic sludge that's coming out of them. And now they're pointing at these things and saying, hey, animal agriculture is gross. We need to stop eating meat. And they're just neglecting the fact that for all of eternity leading up to the last 100 years or so, we didn't have these operations, but they want to point at what they've created, these disgusting things, and now take them down and fail forward into even more ridiculous things that they have. We can talk a lot more about their agendas for insect protein farms and fully automated AI. It's quite ridiculous what they're talking about there. But you're exactly right. I would rather look to the past, right? To regenerative agriculture, to the indigenous practices and the community-based living that have allowed us to evolve this long in human history. There's a reason that we're still here, and it's because these things have worked. And growing your own food is, for your family, is not a terribly difficult thing to do, or else we wouldn't have made it this far. And so we just need to refamiliarize ourselves. That's why these conversations are so important. Yes, is to refamiliarize ourselves with how we got here, with the practices from the past, so that we're not at all tempted or fooled by these people when they say, well, it looks like the only way forward now is to eat bugs from here on out. That's really why I think that's important.
Yeah, and that's, like you said, that's part of, I saw that you did a video recently about the Great Reset as well, and how it applies to, the dinner table, and how we're going to reset the whole, just the meal plan. And I want to say that two things, like for one, I'm an indigenous person who didn't grow up in my culture and has had to kind of reconnect to it as I've gotten older and start going back to those ways and learning from other elders. And a lot of that I get to see even in the Native community, that we have been systematically broken down and taken away from the ways that our ancestors were growing food, where now there's lots of diabetes, there's lots of unhealthy people on reservations. Of course, there's poverty and things like that, but even the idea of kind of eating healthy has been taken away from that. And now there's been a resurgence of people who are saying, look, if we're going to have ceremony, we're going to have sweat lodge, we're going to do our rituals, why don't we bring good, healthy food and make sure that we're all, empowering ourselves rather than bringing all this processed crap. So I think that we do need to look to the past. We need to see how our ancestors got here. And I like to tell people that it's important to be forward thinking. They've made it another way that they've sort of weaponized the terms is the idea of being prepared. You're a prepper now, you're a doomsday prepper, when really all you're talking about is being prepared. And every single one of our ancestors got us here by thinking about the coming seasons and thinking about what, the future. If they hadn't taken those steps, then none of us would have, been able to be here today. So it's just interesting to see how that happens. And then also, for me, I personally am a vegan, and this is another area where I see people assume that because I choose to be vegan, that I've made this choice because I've bought into UN propaganda, or et cetera, et cetera. I'm a vegan who is totally against all this processed fake meat crap that they're pushing, Impossible Burger, Beyond Burger, the insect stuff. And I think we did a story yesterday about KFCs talking about chicken cells, and I think you covered that too. And so all these, to me, this is that technocratic, transhumanist agenda in another form. And it's just been interesting for me as a vegan and somebody who does love animals and wants to work with animals, but I personally don't eat them. But that doesn't mean that I'm saying, hey, let's embrace all their propaganda and start eating something that was printed out of, nothing. Your thoughts on that whole issue?
Yeah, I mean, you said a lot there, and I think you're right about all of it. So I would go even deeper than just saying that's about the natural diet having been excised from indigenous practices. I think it's the connection. It's a spiritual thing. It's a connection to the land. And I think cultivation and growing food and raising animals is something that's very innate, something that's very important to being a human. And so that when people aren't practicing those things, when we're not, we all have to eat every day. And so we should all know how to grow food. That's just part of being human. And lacking that skill, lacking that connection to earth, I think it's it's easier to fall for these kinds of agendas, right? You don't know better when people tell you that some of these lies. So exactly. So that you had mentioned that veganism means you get lumped into this, and you're exactly right. Like, people it's a weaponized space, and you're either falling into one camp or the other. And so if you're not mine, you are the other, and that's just not true at all. The enlightened person, as you've said there, can support animals, can love animals, and would be aware that animal agriculture, when done right, regenerative animal agriculture is actually a beautiful thing, raising animals holistically as part of a homestead. And I would argue that they are actually an integral part. So even if you don't want to eat meat, you need them there to produce manure so that you can feed your plants. And if you're trying to feed yourself only on plants, you'll need a lot of those. So you'll need this nutrition to feed, just to keep the whole nutritive cycle of your homestead running. Animals don't need to be something that you eat, but they are functionally an important part of a homestead.
Yeah, and the other thing to remember is that these technocrats, the people pushing these agendas, we're going to get more into that in a moment, it's not as if once they've conditioned the whole world to start eating insects and to not go into the wilderness anymore and to stay in the smart cities. I just imagine these people are going to be sitting up in their big fancy towers eating chicken every day, just eating the real thing while they got everybody on Soylent Green or something like that. So it's not as if there's anybody that somehow stumbled across this and thinks that these plans that are being rolled out are benevolent or they're doing this for the good of the population or for the good of the planet. That's the lie that's been sold to us. And we're seeing that unfold even more now with COVID-19, and now they're pushing the Great Reset. I'd like for you to talk a little bit about that, like how you've seen the Great Reset play into food.
Yeah, it's perfectly clear, because the Great Reset, which was penned by the World Economic Forum, is coupled right there with Reset the Table, which is the document, the agenda rolled out by the Rockefeller Foundation only a few weeks ago now. And there's been this slew of them that all tie back to the United Nations and these Sustainable Development Goals, that Agenda 21. All of these things are now finding their way in 2020 into various implementations around the world. It takes different forms. It's like the Henry Kissinger, it takes different forms in different parts of the world, right? So it looks a little bit different. And it's the Rockefeller Foundation, these think tanks, they're unelected groups of people who are somehow pushing policy in the US. And the EU, it's done, again, by those unelected bureaucrats at the EU. They have a new farm to fork program that talks about the need to move to AI and automation and shift people's diets away from meat and towards insect sustainable, blah, blah, blah. So all of these things are the same language, but in different parts of the world being rolled out in different strategies. And what they seek to do when they say reset the table is separate people even further from their food supply, and more concerningly is now equate food with, because it's all got to be for your safety. That's like the card that they pull to justify all these ridiculous things, is the environment and it's for your safety. And so we're seeing now the unholy marriage between this medical martial law complex, big pharma, and big ag, big tech and big ag are all coming together, and they're saying, oh, it turns out that what you eat does affect your health. Go figure. We ignored that in Rockefeller medicine for the past 100 years, but now we're seeing the light, and so all of a sudden we're going to take total control over both of these things, and that is exactly what that's exactly what Reset the Table from the Rockefeller Foundation does, and it's a stunning document in that it just goes down. If you look at the authors of the document, it goes down the line from the UN and these other globalist groups to Latino and farm worker, farm worker interest groups, which are now being used to shut down the farms. It goes in. The authors of the Reset the document also include journalists and various meat companies who've been now shutting down their meat factories. So all of these people who informed this reset of the American food system are actively involved in sabotaging the system that we have now. And some of them even took part in a simulation 5 years ago now run by John Podesta's Center for American Progress that was called the Food Chain Reaction Game. And much like Event 201, it looked forward and imagined, it did a simulation, it imagined that there was a collapse of the world food system. And in fact, Food Chain Reaction Game posited that this would result from a pandemic. So that website has been taken down just in the last month here, now that we're actually entering into the script that they played out 5 years ago. But it's just stunning to me that, of course, the solution to that, after many people died of hunger, was tighter global governance and cooperation internationally. So yes, so it is as if the world is walking through a series of scripts that have been crafted by these globalist think tanks and groups, and all of them end up, pushing us, like I said, failing forward into more global governments, more technocratic, transhumanist food supply, medical, martial law, and perfect information awareness, contact tracing, all the things we've really seen unveiled this year, the digital blockchain for currency and for supply chain management. All of these things are being justified by this COVID-19 pandemic this year. It's stunning.
Yeah, and of course, like you said, it's all been coming out this year. It's been coalescing, and you did a great report actually on the Reset the Table and the document, the exercise you're talking about. So I'll link that below for anybody who wants to see that. And now many of us, we've seen that it seems that China is the model for the technocratic state. Like clearly they're further advanced with surveillance, with having the population to be submissive to this surveillance. They've got tight controls over any protests. They can disappear people. I mean, all the things that we've heard and seen. It's clear that if somebody is an authoritarian and they have a goal, they're looking in the direction of China. Like, maybe that looks like what we might want to do there. And you recently did another report where you were showing how this is all unfolding in China, which was just insane to me. I mean, you did a great job covering it, talking about how now they're going to start controlling the diet of the individuals in China. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's amazing. So, just the same, just like the Rockefeller Foundation, Reset the Table, and then the EU, it's Farm to Fork. In China, they just unveiled this, it's literally called the Clean Your Plate Initiative, and it is the most insane invocation of the nanny state, where they are making it, they've banned people from posting pictures of them eating large serving sizes on social media, because you shouldn't be, you need to be more conservative in what you're eating. And if you try and post pictures of yourself eating a large pizza, it says you should really value food. And they've deployed these AI trash cans with facial recognition in them, such that if you go to throw, if you waste food, if you go and you throw away food waste in the trash cans and it's weighed and it says this is way too much, you shouldn't be throwing away this much oatmeal or whatever it is you're throwing away, then your social credit score will be docked because you should value food. And they're justifying a lot of this, of course, again, with the COVID-19 threat to the food supply. So President Xi got up there and said, this is how we're gonna make you clean your plate now. And it is just stunning. A lot of this technology has been tested. Like South Korea was sort of the testing ground specifically for the food waste aspect of this. They rolled out over the last decade a few different systems that were used to reduce their food waste, like handing you very expensive, so basically taxed little green bags that you could throw away food waste, and it was illegal to throw away food waste in any other way. But yeah, China is taking that and amping it up even further with the AI facial recognition as they roll that out. And even in Myanmar the other day, a restaurant has erected these, it's like jail bars of different sizes, and you get a discount at the restaurant based on which set of bars you can squeeze through. So if you're super skinny, you can get like a 50% discount. But if you start packing on those pounds, you're going to start paying more for your food. And while we've heard about this exact concept in the past from the IPCC, it was called a fat tax. But they could never get that to fly. Go figure, right? Nobody wants a fat tax. But if you instead call it a skinny discount, it is functionally equivalent, but somehow it's politically more acceptable. And so yeah, these things are rolling out internationally right now, and it's amazing.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say like they couldn't get the fat tax through, so they try skinny discount. And there's a lot of talks right now about mandatory vaccinations perhaps coming down the pipe because they're rushing this forward at warp speed. But I tend to feel that it might not end up being mandatory in the sense that there's going to be people coming to every single house. I mean, it might, depending on how authoritarian things go. But if it doesn't go that way, I suspect that it'll be more like what you were just saying, and we're already kind of seeing this. You can't come into business if you're not wearing a mask. Well, you're not going to be able to go to work. You're not going to be able to travel. You're not going to be able to operate. And once the social credit scores roll out, universally, internationally, well, the exact same thing you were talking about with Clean Your Plate will happen. Well, you haven't you're not eating the right foods, or you don't have you didn't say the right things on social media, or you're not donating to the right places, you're not taking your trash out in time. All the things that they are doing in China are going to be the standard, I believe, for eventually the United States and much of the world if there's no pushback. And it's just so crazy to see how quick the technocracy has rolled forward. And the reason I think what you're doing is so important is because, as you noted, Kissinger and others have said that food is so key. Clearly, everybody has to eat. Everybody has to eat to survive. We need water and we need food. Those are the most basic things. We could live under some trees out in the streets if it really came down to it, but we have to eat and we have to have water. And if you can control those things and limit them, or you start setting higher barriers for entry to get those things, they are able to do what they're doing now, which is just socially engineer society to be obedient, compliant, and to do whatever the heck they want. I mean, do you have personally optimism for the direction we're headed and everything you see happening?
Well, the direction we're headed right now, absolutely not. I remain chronically optimistic in humanity. Derrick, we actually had an interview scheduled last week, and I had to cancel it. Apologies, because of the wildfires out here. And you might think that this was a terrible experience or a bad story, but it was actually one of the most inspiring things that's happened to me recently, and it's because as these wildfires rolled through and people were being evacuated, including some farms that had hundreds of animals, people came together in ways I have never seen or experienced, Derrick. It was so awesome. People who wouldn't speak on normal days, or maybe wouldn't even get along, or they had Trump and Biden stickers, but they were all out there getting goats evacuated from this goat farm and to get out of the way of the wildfire. And just to see people come together and work for a common purpose, literally moving mountains, things that should, for all of practical purposes, been impossible. To move 100 goats in a single night just is like, it's not going to happen. Sorry, goats. But it did happen. And so I can imagine that if, as the fire were such an immediate, visceral, visible threat, if through conversations like this one, we can succeed at shining a light on these things, these agendas, and spread the word. If we're all out there spreading the word, then the threats we're describing can also be made visible. And then my chronic optimism fires up, and I think, yeah, we can come together and we can move those mountains too. And yeah, they're bigger than 100 goats. We got some real work cut out for us here as humanity. But that's that's why we're here. I think that's where the optimism comes in. By the way, I couldn't agree more with the no mask, no service becomes no jab, no job, and then that becomes turn in your guns for food. Or, if you want meat this week, it's going to be based on your social credit score and how well you've socially distanced. And yeah, all of these things. That's why all of these are becoming the digitally controlled passport and digital currency. And, all of the grocery stores have already been testing for a couple of years now facial recognition and AI in their stores, so that Walmart or the Amazon stores or even Kroger are all tracking you as you go through their store and able to enforce. In fact, this year they've started to enforce, when they had sugar rationing and other things like this, the cash register would just pop up and say, this customer has already bought sugar this week or whatever like this. So all of these rules are already implemented in the computer, and they just need to be tied into some of these other social credit score databases to actually execute on the things we're imagining here.
And it's pretty crazy, man. You mentioned the grocery stores. So we have a Texas chain called HEB out here. And I've only, I was out of the U.S. at the beginning of the COVID stuff going on, because I'm trying to get land in Mexico and, build my homestead there. And I've come back into the chaos of people wearing masks everywhere and just, navigating this whole insanity. And maybe it's been going on for a while and I didn't notice it because it seems fairly normal to a lot of people. But I noticed when I was checking out one of these days that the young kid that was checking people out, I had a problem with the register, and he's like, oh yeah, hold on, let me do that. And they put their thumb down and they scan their thumb. That's the way they check in. They don't have any passcode anymore. They already have these kids who are, maybe high school kids, college, whatever, just getting a summer job at the grocery store, used to just walking up to the machine, putting their thumbprint on it. Okay, cool, there you go. And I try to, every time it happens, I try to just spark a conversation like, whoa, that's interesting. That's kind of weird. What do you think about that? And most of them, yeah, it's just, it's the way we sign in. They don't really see it as they're already kind of used to it. It's already normalized. And it's just so crazy. And to the other point you said, man, with the optimism about people, we're here in Houston right now. And when Harvey and really any number of hurricanes have hit, but specifically Harvey, when that hit here a couple of years ago, I saw the same thing. I saw people, like neighborhoods, just coming together. We had people using decentralized apps to come rescue people on boats, and delivering food from all over. Just people really coming together and getting organized and coordinated in ways that you don't typically see. So I am hopeful that as that fire, the metaphorical fire, starts to burn under our asses a little bit more, and we start to feel the heat of it, that more people are going to come together. And personally, that's what I have seen. And I want to start to wrap up on solutions, because I think that when you're starting to focus on solutions, you can feel a little more optimistic. But if you're somebody who feels like, man, I'm so dependent on the system, I don't even have like a box of some canned goods. I'm totally dependent on the grocery store. I don't even got a basil plant. I have nothing. I'm just totally glued into the system, which some people watching this might be in that situation. It can be very harrowing. It can feel like I'm never going to be able to unplug. So when they start, tightening the grip, many people are going to have to make choices and say, okay, well, I want to feed my family. I guess I'm going to get that vaccine. I guess I'm going to comply because I didn't plan ahead. I didn't think ahead. And here I am now, and I have to make tough choices. So what can we do? What can we leave people with as far as solutions? If you just had a few tips for how people could get started, clearly, look up your work, look up the history of the Grand Solar Minimum, look at some of the information you have. But what are some other practical things you might be able to offer people?
I think spreading the word, familiarizing yourself with what's going on and spreading the word remains at the top of my list, because I'm hard pressed to identify a silver bullet other than that. And when I imagine what it would look like if tomorrow we woke up in a world where everyone understood these agendas, it's just, it would be a completely different story, right? It'd be game over for these guys instantaneously, because none of us would tolerate it anymore, and we would work together to end it. I don't know what that would look like, but I know if everyone knew what was going on, we would get around this. So spreading the word gets us closer to them. Also, the people they've been weaponized too. People are voting against the ability to grow food and things like this. So we need to recruit these people back onto, as I call it, back to Team Grow, and get them on our side working with us. And then I think you're doing a great job. I think it's all about community as well. These freedom cells are a fantastic idea that I want to talk more about, because none of us can do it alone. Like we said, when you look back at cultures and indigenous practices and just the way humanity has always survived, we've always been there with our neighbors and with our churches, or whatever the groupings were. If one of us lost our crops, then we could always get help from our neighbors and get extra seed and replant and recover, because it's, that's especially when the sun does these things. Growing food does. It's not a surefire thing, and crop loss is part of the game sometimes. So yeah, I think so for the people that are concerned right now and are looking for that first step, I think really just setting down the fear and starting to take steps. Even if you think it's completely ridiculous, there's nothing you can do, nothing I can achieve. If I plant this squash, this is a thought I've had a lot, Derrick. If I plant this squash, like, how is that going to help me? How is that going to save my family from the ridiculous agendas we're talking about today? And the answer is, it really, bottom line, it can't save you one squash alone, but you start learning, right? Just plant that first squash. You start to see how seeds, when they germinate best, and how you keep them alive. And the more, even if it's microgreens in your closet, the more experience you get with these things. And I'll tell you, when you work with nature, when you're on the side of growing food and trying to produce things, magical things happen, and that's really helpful too. So just taking that first step and starting to grow some food, and then learning from it, and seeing that the nature is there just waiting for you, waiting to conspire with you to help you overcome these problems. And then that means the more that you engage with it, the less alone you feel. And also starting conversations with those around you that are doing the same thing. Yeah, you'll find that this is that it supplants the fear right away as you start making progress. And back to that single squash, if that's all you can do today, again, do it. That's fantastic, because even these baby steps, if you take them every day for some weeks, some months, a couple of years, suddenly you look back and you've made it miles and miles. You've built a city or a huge permaculture food forest with perennials. These things don't happen overnight, but they happen squash by squash. It's just, you got to start taking steps and keep taking steps.
Absolutely. And since you mentioned freedom cells, it's been inspiring, and for me affirming, to see that since this COVID crisis began, that through the website, the freedomcells.org website, which is just like a
a placeholder social network to help people make the initial connection with the hopes that they'll meet in the real world and start organizing locally. But we have seen an explosion of interest. We're at now, I think, close to 4,000 people from around the world who've joined. And, we started I've been promoting it for about 4 or 5 years, and there hasn't been as much interest as there has been in the last 6 months because of all this is going. And again, I think it's because as that grip gets tighter, people who maybe before were like, yeah, I see this stuff happening, but it's no big deal. I got plenty of time. I'll worry about that later. Now they're like, oh shit, maybe I should do something. And so there's a real drive here, I think, to push for change and to really just push in a better direction. And if anybody is interested in that, as Christian was saying, whether it's churches, your tribe, your local community, your neighbors, freedom cells, it's just the whole goal is it's a mutual aid group. It's people that you can depend on, that you can lean on, and that you can collaborate and work together to build resources, to share knowledge, to share skills. And if you have a fire that you need to rescue some goats from, those are the people you would call on to come together. All right, let's take care of this project. Or if you have a hurricane, or if the economy collapses, or even without any of those sort of doomsday scenarios, if you want to build a garden, if you want to teach each other how to, shoot a gun or how to defend yourself or how to grow food, it could ultimately be used in any number of ways. But the point is, it's time for us to kind of decentralize, to localize, and really come together so that we can take on the multitude of things that we are dealing with right now, including grand solar minimum, resetting our plate, all these things that we see on the horizon. And some of them aren't even on the horizon anymore. They're literally staring us in the face now. So I appreciate everything you're doing, man. Anything else you want to add?
No, I think it's really well said. If you are one of those people that hasn't started growing stuff yet, one of the things I've done with the IceAgeFarmer channel is make sure to have conversations with a few different people to get them to share their thoughts on how to get started. And so I've had conversations with Marjorie Wildcraft, who gives you a really easy 3-step system to grow half of your calories in your backyard, or Matt Powers, who's a permaculture guy and talks about how to build soil. Had a conversation with a Hopi dry farmer who talked about some of those indigenous practices and how cultivation ties into their spirituality. I thought that was really interesting. Just because all of these people have drastically different approaches and even ways of thinking about growing your own food, but all of them are successful in it. And so that helps me to understand that, okay, there's not one right solution that I have to master and I don't know it yet. No, it's whatever works for you. And if you eat different things than different people, then you can grow different things. You got to meet yourself in the middle there. So grow what you like to eat, and then maybe start eating more of what you can grow. But start on both of those things today. And again, Derrick, I just would thank you for drawing attention to this. As I said, I think it's the most important and pressing conversation we can have. I see food security very much at risk in the rest of this year. And I think we all need to be growing our own food as much as possible and spreading the word and saving those seeds, which, important note, when you save seeds and then you grow them again next year, they actually learn about where you are and they get more robust and they grow even better for you. So if you can go, here's a great way to get started. If you can go find master gardeners or permaculture teachers or whatever in your local area, these people know what it takes to be successful. They have years probably of experience that you want to learn from, and they've got seeds that have already learned from that will grow well where you are. And so they've climbed a lot of that learning curve for you. And so definitely go out. And plus, they love it. They want to have conversations with you. They do it because they like it, and they are eager to teach you all of those things they've learned and all those trials they've been through. So definitely make a point of going out and finding people that are already growing food where you are and aligning with them. That's a really surefire way to get a leap forward, a jump start on the whole thing.
Everybody, please do check out Christian at IceAgeFarmer. Check out his reports on the Chinese situation, the reset the plate, and the other interviews he mentioned. I'll link to all of those below. I really appreciate your time, brother. And until next time, everybody, find me at The Conscious Resistance. Find him at IceAgeFarmer. And remember, you are powerful, you are beautiful, and you are free. Peace.